It started with something small, almost harmless. Firewood going missing in the dead of night. But for Tom Thompson, a quiet man who kept himself in a spotless HOA neighborhood, it was never just about wood. It was about being watched, targeted, and punished differently for the same things everyone else did. As fines stacked up and accusations grew sharper, one neighbor's power trip exposed something far uglier than HOA rules. What followed would shake the entire street and force everyone to confront a truth they've been ignoring for years. But the real question is, how far can someone be pushed before they push back? And what happened next would change everything. Before everything unraveled, Tom Thompson lived a life most people would barely notice. He worked quietly from home, paid his dues on time, followed the rules, and kept his head down. After losing his wife years earlier, routine became his anchor. Mornings were coffee and emails. Evenings were spent in his backyard, splitting firewood by hand, finding comfort in the rhythm of honest work. In Maple Ridge Estates, a place obsessed with appearances, Tom believed that staying invisible was the safest way to belong. But invisibility never truly protects you when you're already being judged. The neighborhood liked to call itself peaceful, orderly, respectable. Manicured lawns, matching mailboxes, polite smiles that vanished the moment backs were turned. The HOA enforced rules with surgical precision, but somehow those rules landed harder on certain people. Tom noticed it slowly at first. Warnings for things others did freely. Inspections that lingered a little too long. Notes that felt less like reminders and more like accusations. He told himself not to read into it. He told himself it was coincidence. Then Karen Whitmore became HOA president. With her clipboard, camera, and quiet authority, she decided who fit the image of the neighborhood and who didn't. And for reasons she never said out loud, Tom seemed to fall short of her eyes. His firewood was suddenly a problem. His yard was suddenly under scrutiny. His presence felt tolerated, not accepted. Still, Tom tried to comply. He stacked the wood neater. He stayed polite. He stayed silent. What he didn't know was that while he was trying to avoid conflict, someone else was already crossing a line, one that would turn quiet tension into something far more dangerous. And once that line was crossed, there was no going back. The tension didn't arrive all at once. It crept in quietly, disguised as rules, paperwork, and polite language that carried sharp edges beneath the surface. After the first warning about his firewood, Tom started noticing how often Karen's attention drifted his way. Her inspections lingered longer at his fence than anyone else's. Her camera seemed to click more frequently when she passed his house. Other neighbors bent rules casually. Bins left out overnight, cars parked slightly off-center, but those things somehow never made it into official notices. Tom's did. Then the firewood started disappearing to Eddie first. He doubted himself. Memory plays tricks when life becomes routine, and he told himself he must have miscounted. But the pattern was too precise. Logs vanished in neat numbers, always overnight, always from the same spot. Someone wasn't taking it out of desperation. They were selecting it, choosing it, and doing it with confidence. As the pile shrank, the HOA letters multiplied. Each notice sounded neutral on paper, but the message underneath was unmistakable. His property was a problem. His presence disrupted the image Maple Ridge tried so hard to project. Tom felt in the wording, in how violations were framed as concerns for safety and aesthetic harmony, phrases that sounded harmless until they were used to single someone out. The more he complied, the more the scrutiny tightened, like the rules themselves were bending to keep him in place. That was when he realized this wasn't about firewood at all. IT was about control, about who belonged and who was merely tolerated, about how authority can hide behind procedure while practicing something far uglier. Tom had seen it before in quieter ways. Store clerks watching him too closely, neighbors locking their doors a little faster. But here it had teeth. Fines, threats, power backed by paperwork. When he installed cameras, it wasn't anger that drove him. It was exhaustion, the kind that settles in when you realize silence hasn't protected you. The footage confirmed what he already felt in his gut, a familiar figure moving through his yard with ease. No hesitation, no fear of consequences. Someone who believed the rules were tools, not boundaries. And yet, even with proof, the pressure didn't ease. Karen didn't retreat. She escalated. She used meetings to frame Tom as a risk. She spoke about safety while benefiting from what she took. She stood in rooms full of neighbors and spoke with confidence, knowing most people wouldn't challenge her. And why would they? It was easier to stay quiet. Easier to let one man absorb the discomfort than risk becoming the next target. Tom felt the isolation settle in. Conversations stopped when he walked by. Smiles tightened. He wasn't openly shunned, but he was marked. The kind of marking that doesn't need words. The kind that says you're different, and different is inconvenient. That's when the injustice shifted from passive to personal. Being fined for items that were no longer even there. Being warned for hazards created by someone else. Being talked about instead of talked to. Every step forward felt blocked by a system designed to appear fair while functioning selectively. And the deeper he looked, the clearer it became. This wasn't an accident. It was a pattern. What hurt most wasn't the theft or the fines. It was a certainty that if he reacted emotionally, he confirmed the very assumptions being made about him. That if he raised his voice, he'd be labeled difficult, aggressive, unreasonable, labels that stuck far longer than facts ever did. So he stayed calm. He documented. He waited. And he watched the neighborhood hold its breath, pretending nothing was wrong. But pressure doesn't disappear when ignored. It builds. It looks for release. And in Maple Ridge, that release was coming fast. The theft continued. The letters grew harsher. Karen's confidence turned careless. She believed she was untouchable, protected by position and perception. Tom knew then that this story wouldn't end quietly, because when power goes unchecked, it always overreaches. And when it does, the fallout is never small. What was taken in secret was about to be exposed in the open, and the consequences would force everyone watching to pick a side. He had tried compliance. He had tried silence. Now, all that remained was truth, and the moment it surfaced, nothing in Maple Ridge would ever feel the same again. And just when it seemed like the injustice had gone as far as it could, one final act would turn simmering tension into an explosion no one saw coming. The night it happened, the neighborhood didn't recognize itself. What had always been quiet and controlled shattered in an instant, ripped open by a sound so violent it sent people running to their windows. Smoke rose into the dark sky, thick and angry, curling above manicured rooftops that had never known chaos. Alarm screamed. Lights flicked on. And suddenly, Maple Ridge was no longer pretending everything was perfect. At the center of it all stood Karen's house. The same woman who had preached safety, order, and discipline now stood surrounded by flashing lights and stunned neighbors. Her authority reduced to confusion and fear. The source of the chaos wasn't mysterious for long. Fire officials traced it back to her fireplace. Would that burn too fast? Too hot? Would that didn't belong to her? As people gathered, something shifted in the air. Whispers spread. Eyes turned. The story Karen had controlled for so long began slipping from her grip, because this wasn't just an accident. It was evidence. Evidence of theft, of hypocrisy, of power abused behind polite language and official letterheads. Tom stood among the crowd, silent and steady, watching the truth surface on its own. He didn't need to shout. He didn't need to accuse. The moment spoke louder than anything he ever could. The same neighbors who once avoided eye contact now looked at him with understanding, some with guilt, some with quiet shame. For the first time, Karen wasn't directing the narrative. What made the moment unbearable wasn't the fire or the smoke. It was a realization settling over everyone watching, that the rules had never been equal. That one person concerned had been another person's punishment. That bias didn't always arrive wearing anger. Sometimes it wore authority, confidence, and a smile. Tom felt it then, not victory, not relief, but something heavier. Validation. The kind that comes after being doubted, watched, and cornered for simply existing in a space that claimed to be fair. This wasn't just his story anymore. It belonged to everyone standing there, forced to see what they'd ignored. And as the smoke drifted away and the night grew quiet again, one truth remained burning beneath the surface. This wasn't the end. Because exposure is only the beginning. What came next would decide whether Maple Ridge learned from this moment or tried to bury it like everything else before. When the smoke cleared and the emergency lights faded, Maple Ridge returned to its quiet routines, but Tom never went back to who he was before. The fine stopped. The letters disappeared. The rules suddenly softened, as if the system itself realized it had been exposed. Care and authority unraveled quickly once people stopped pretending not to see. Committees reviewed actions. Positions shifted. Power that had once gone unquestioned quietly changed hands. But the real impact wasn't written in HOA records. It lived in the way neighbors finally met Tom's eyes, in the apologies that came too late, but still mattered, in the uncomfortable conversations people had to face about why they stayed silent for so long. Tom didn't feel triumphant. He felt tired, because justice that comes only after damage is still justice delayed. And the truth was simple and painful. If he had been treated fairly from the beginning, none of it would have happened. What unfolded in that neighborhood wasn't just a dispute over firewood or authority. It was a reflection of something much larger. A reminder that racism doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it hides behind rules, policies, and titles. Sometimes it looks like concern. Sometimes it calls itself order. And too often, it relies on everyone else staying quiet. Tom kept living his life. He worked. He tended his yard. He rebuilt the peace he was told he'd violated. But he carried the lesson with him. The understanding that dignity is fragile when power goes unchecked, and silence is never neutral. Silence always protects the system, never the person being harmed. This story isn't rare. It isn't extreme. It happens in neighborhoods, workplaces, schools, and streets every day. Different names, different settings, same imbalance, same cost. And most of the time, there's no explosion to force people to look. So the question isn't what Tom did when he was pushed too far. The real question is what the rest of us do before it ever reaches that point. When we see someone being targeted, when rules are enforced selectively, when fairness becomes conditional. Do we stay comfortable and quiet, or do we finally speak? Because justice doesn't begin with consequences. It begins with awareness. And change only happens when we stop looking away.